Hello and welcome. This is Tamiya Robles. I am the host of this podcast, Adoption Exposed. Welcome. So, this is my first episode, and I'm so excited that you guys have come on here with me and are willing to listen to my story. I appreciate that. This episode is going to be about me giving you the shortest version of my adoption story. Like most adoptions, there's always so many pieces to this crazy puzzle. I mean, it's a lot. I've never heard of a very simple cut and dry adoption with no backstory, but in particular with mine, there's so many stories within a story within a story. And I'm just going to try to give you the most condensed version for now. Maybe in the future, I'll give you a long version, but I want to be careful not to miss any main points. So I'll probably give it to you guys in increments as I go along. But yeah, definitely check me out, listen to the podcast. If you have any questions, let me know. But let's get right into it. Now, your greatness here. Tamiya Robles was born January 18th, 1979. And I say 79 is very important, I guess, as far as adoptions are concerned, because if you know anything about adoption laws, things were different in the 70s as opposed to the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, and beyond, because the laws forever changed. So things were different in the 70s when it came to adoptions. So keep that in mind as I tell my story. And those of you that were adopted or are going through the adoption process, you may hear things that you haven't experienced or will never experience that maybe my parents or myself have experienced because it was just a different time. So when I was born to a single mother who had a child before me. And she had me in Philadelphia. I know her version of what happened. And I specifically say her version because I don't really think the information that I have is truthful. So the information that I'm going to share with you guys today is actually going to be on the adoptive side, my mother's side of the story, because my parents were very truthful people. There was never any confusion when it came to my adoption. My mother did everything. So I lived in a two-parent household. So when you hear me speak on my mom, it may seem like she was a single mom, but she wasn't. She was a housewife. She went to college, then she went to law school, then she became an attorney. But my father, he's like a yes man. So like he's just pretty laid back. He was highly involved. He wanted a child too, but my mom was always the type of person to take the reins of everything. So when you hear me say my mom, my mom, my mom, it's because all the information came from her. You can ask my dad some questions about my adoption, and he used to always be like, "I don't know, ask your mom." So like, like he knows very little, I guess. So yeah, just want to brace you guys. No, I wasn't raised in a single family household. So my mother, not to put her business in the street or anything, but before I was born, she was married to my father and had a hysterectomy and couldn't have children. She wanted children really badly, more than one. She came from a large family. She was the second oldest of five girls. My father was the youngest of seven children. So she wanted naturally to have multiple children, but couldn't. When they came to the conclusion that they wanted to adopt, she was very specific. My mother is a Virgo. And if you guys are Virgos, you know how they are. They're very detailed, specific. They want things a certain way. And she specifically wanted a Black girl that came from nothing, the poorest backgrounds in Philadelphia. And her rationale to that was she knew she could provide a better life to a child from that type of background. And I dig it. I respect that. And she got me. Well, according to her, back then, I don't know if this is how they do adoptions now, she was able to visit an orphanage. And this said orphanage in Philadelphia was the orphanage I was living at the time. When my biological incubator gave birth to me, she gave me up the moment I was born. She didn't hold me, she didn't look at me. I have confirmed that with the incubator. That's the only way I know that. Without speaking to the incubator, I would have never known. There's no record of that. Other than, to the best of my knowledge, my mom told me that I was born and was given up. And the incubator just basically confirmed that. So when I was given up, the adoption didn't occur yet. So there was no request for a young black newborn baby girl from the poorest streets of Philadelphia. If anything, that type of child usually ages out in adoptions and in the foster care system. If you know anything about that, that's real shit. Nobody really cares for black little girls. That's just a hard fact. But my mom did. My mom wanted that. Also, I don't know if this is important in this shorter version of my adoption story, but in the longer version, it's extremely important. My parents were from the Nation of Islam in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, 1/3 of the black population are Muslims of some sort, and we happen to be a part of the Nation of Islam. So that plays a part in my complete adoption story. But my mother and my father were obviously pro-black. Um, and it was very important that they had a black child and provided for a poor black child, and that she was raised Muslim. Side note, my biological family were different versions of Muslims, and they weren't from Philly, they were from the outskirts of Philadelphia. And that actually became a thing that came into play in the future. So I will talk about that as well. And I might even have some of those family members on in case you guys are interested. So my mother decided that she was going to check out the orphanage, this particular orphanage that I happened to be at. And she said that she looked at the children and she was really excited and things like that. And she saw me and she fell in love with me and that she wanted to adopt me. And that's what happened. The woman that did the adoption, I actually met her when I was 18. Her name was Marie. I forgot her last name. That's one thing my dad actually does know. She knows her last name. I don't remember her last name. Sweet Italian lady, really super sweet, little petite little thing. And she actually remembered both sides of my family. She remembered the biological, but she mostly remembered my parents. And she spoke highly of my parents. They were very eager to adopt me and super excited. When they did adopt me, I was 6 months. I don't know how old I was when they saw me. The adoption process took pretty long. So I don't know if I was like 3 months at the time, but my mother said I was definitely not a newborn. Boom. That's how the adoption happened. End of story. Gotta go. No, but yeah, that's how the adoption happened. Um, so let's fast forward to when I found out I was adopted. So I actually remember this day pretty clearly. I don't know why, but back in the 80s, we had this gray Honda Accord, and I was sitting in the back seat. I was about 3 years old. My feet were just dangling at the edge of the seat. And my dad went out the car. I don't know if he went to the gas station or something, but he left out the car and came back a few minutes later. And I was just thinking, and I looked at my mom, I was like, because I think a lot, right? Like even as a kid, I guess I'll just think about strange things. And I just said to my mom, "Hey, what did it look like in your stomach?" And then my mom was like, "Oh, baby, you were never in my stomach." And I was like, she's not understanding what I'm saying. Let me say it again. I'm like, "Mom, what did it look like when I was living in your stomach and I opened my eyeballs and I looked around? What was I looking at?" And she was like, "You were not living in my stomach. You weren't in my stomach, Tamiya. Tamiya, you weren't in my stomach." And I was like, this lady isn't too intelligent. I was like, "Mom, how was I not in your stomach?" And at the age of 3, I don't even know how I knew that babies lived in stomachs. I don't ask me, but this is how it went. And she was like, "Well, sweetie, you were adopted." And I was like, "All right, this story isn't getting anywhere. Like, let me move on." And that's literally, I remember feeling like that. Like, this lady's just not getting it. Like, she's telling me about adoptions. Like, what does that have to do with me? Like, okay, lady. And then time went on. I'm living my best life. And like I said in my intro, adoption was never a thing. It was just never a conversation piece. My parents didn't introduce me as their adopted child, and hearing other people's stories where they're adopted and their parents are like, "Yeah, this is my adopted kid." It's like, whoa, I'm not about that life. My family's not about that life, and it hurts my soul that they had to live like that. That's harsh to me. You don't ever tell an adopted child that they're adopted. I mean, you don't introduce them that way. I have thoughts behind that. We can get into that. We could tussle in the comments if you want, but that's just my I can't. Maybe because I didn't grow up that way. So everybody knew I was adopted, obviously, in my family, right? And my cousins knew, on my father's side, just like he was the youngest of his siblings, I was the youngest of all of their kids. So all my cousins, I'm the youngest. They all knew I was adopted. On my mom's side, everybody knew I was adopted. That was my age and older. I have little cousins. I don't know when they found out I was adopted. Some of them to this day probably don't even know I'm adopted. I don't know. It's just not a thing. Like so here's the tea. My great grandmother, her name is Grandma Amy. She's the greatest Capricorn I've ever met in my life. I was born on her birthday. And my grandmother is a Virgo, my mother's a Virgo, and Virgos at times, a lot of times, play favorites. So my mother is my grandmother's favorite. And because my grandmother favored my mother, she favored me. And I was special. Let me say that. I wasn't favored, I was deemed special. And when my grandmother found out that I was born on my great grandmother's birthday, it was just a seal. It was a sign from heaven that I came from God. I was meant to be with their family, and that's just how I was raised. And the relationship I had with my great grandmother, it was amazing. Me and her are the same. Like, I got my sugar addiction from her. Like, we got the same problem. We love candy corn. Like, she was the shit. She was the shit, my great grandmother, right? But we were born on the same day. So that just solidified that I belonged in this family and this is what God wanted. And that's how I was just raised. Now, oddly enough, fast forward, my parents are like dumb short. Like, my dad is 5'3", my mother was 5'2", I'm 5'10", right? But growing up, people would say, "Oh, you look like your dad, you sound like your mom," or vice versa. My handwriting is a mixture of both of my parents to this day. My mom's handwriting, only like two people in this world can read her handwriting. It was like me and my dad. Maybe three or four other people can read her handwriting because it's that chicken scratch. And my father has perfect penmanship. My penmanship is literally a mixture of both. Um, it's odd, but like under this wig, I'm always wearing wigs. You guys will get used to that, right? But I have hair, and I always have a lot of hair. And all the girls on my mom's side of the family always had long hair, and I had long hair. I look like them. I act like them. I talk like them. So nobody's ever introduced me as my adopted cousin. Even if you said I was adopted, it's like, how? She acts like y'all, she talks like y'all. That's all we knew. You know what I mean? When I got older, there was another time I found out my mother explained in detail, like, I guess to the best of her ability, that I was adopted. I don't remember how that one came up, but finally it sunk in. I think I was about 7 or 8 that I understood a little bit more that I was adopted, but it was never a thing. It was never talked about. It's just never a thing. My mom, I think when they told me, because I've always been an open book. One time they told me, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm adopted." I'm telling everybody. I would tell my teacher when I went to school, "You know what? I found out I was adopted. I'm adopted." And then the teacher would be like, "Okay," and I go to the next period. "Hey, I'm adopted. Just found out yesterday. I'm adopted." I mean, still being a kid, I wasn't comprehending what all of that meant, nor did I care. So, It got back to my mom. The school called and said, your daughter is going around school telling people she's adopted, and we just thought you should know. So my mom sat me down and was like, just stop telling people you're adopted. It's not their business. So this is what I'm used to. There's my mom would be like, there's no situation where someone needs to know that you're adopted. This is family business. This is between us, and that's it. Period. So I'm like, all right, cool. Now, internally, when we as a family, when it ever came come up with my parents and my parents never brought it up. I would bring it up. And I would ask questions as I got older. I wasn't one of those teenagers that when I became an adolescent, I looked at my short ass parents and then I looked at my height and say, hey, what's going on? I already knew I was adopted. I comprehended that I was adopted, but I wasn't one of those teenagers that had an identity crisis. Now, that's another big thing that some adoptees have, where they have some sort of issue with how they look. I didn't have that problem. I didn't think I was unattractive. My parents always said I was beautiful and amazing. They didn't say I was beautiful per se. I think they were like, I was just great. I was just like amazing. And I could be even more amazing if, blah, blah, blah. Now, keep in mind, I did not have a perfect childhood in any way, shape, or form or fashion. And you're going to hear that in the future stories. Actually, my mother and I had a horrible, horrible mother-daughter relationship. Very horrible. It was abusive at times. There was no sexual abuse, thank God, but it was physical, emotional, psychological abuse. And you'll hear a lot of that. But again, I'm giving you the condensed version of this story so you have an idea of how my adoption came about. So, the one time I did ask my mother when I was still like trying to wrap my mind around being adopted was, are you my real mother? Or since I think I worded it like, since you're not my real mother. And then my mother explained what a mother was. And it made sense to me. So, how my parents explained adoption to me and how it was brought to me, it was more like with logic and intelligence. And they kind of left it up to me to a certain degree on how I viewed my own adoption. One thing that my mother did always say was, if you ever want to find your biological mother, because that's what she called her, your biological mother. If you ever want to find your biological mother and you need help, I'll help you to the best of my ability. However, I never want to meet her. And I said, okay, didn't quite understand that. And I think you kind of have to be a mother to truly understand that. And then you have to be an adoptive mother to super, super understand that, right? I'm not an adoptive mother, but I have kids. You know what I mean? So I get it. And that was real talk. So they were honest with me. They were real with me. And I never considered my parents not to be my parents, and I've never considered them to be adoptive parents. They're not adoptive parents. But again, sometimes when I have to explain things, like if I have to explain something to the doctor, that might come up because they'll be like, okay, so what's your medical background? It's like, I don't know. So one time I went to the doctor and I'm so naturally not thinking of being adopted. And then they're like, is there hypertension in your family? I'm like, no. And it's like, I don't know. I'm not sure. And then the doctor got an attitude with me, like, how do you not know? I mean, you can't just call your parents. And then I was like, I was adopted. His face broke. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, sorry for being a dick. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you're a doctor. You should know these things. So I didn't know anything about my medical. I wasn't curious about who my biological was, other than the older I got, I just wanted to know why. I just wanted to know why I was adopted. It didn't change anything. It was never going to change anything. It was just a simple question, hey, why was I adopted? Why'd you put me up for adoption? You know what I mean? Now, what my parents were given when I was born and the adoption was completed, let me say when the adoption was completed, they were given non-identifying information on a closed adoption. Again, this is the 70s, 79. things were different than I'm sure they are now. I don't think open adoptions were available. My mom was not going to handle having know her personality. There was going to be no open adoptions popping at all. They gave her non-identifying information on my biological mother and her side of the family, and my non-identifying information on my biological father's side. And with most Black kids, especially during that time, that revolutionary time, some motherfuckers just didn't know who their dads were in certain cases. So when it came to describing him and what he looked like and his background and all that, little information was given. It was just like he is a deadbeat. He was a Mason. There was very little information about his parents. It was like, I think his dad was a Mason. It was just so sparse. But the biological incubator had so much information on her side, but it was non identifying information. And health information wasn't really inputted in that into the file that my mom was given. She gave it to me. It was typed, right? Like it was typed on a typewriter. And by that time, so much time had gone by, like the words were fading a little bit, but I kind of memorized it and it just wasn't enough information. I think she had a couple siblings and one was semi-successful at the time. She wasn't successful. It is just worthless. But I think one of the reasons why they do it that way is so you don't have the information to go find your incubators. That's it, your people makers. It was also a sealed case. So because it was sealed, my information was in Harrisburg. I didn't know all of that until I became an adult. It just did not faze me at all until I got kicked out of the house. So that's where the foster care system came in. Like I said, I had a pretty bad childhood, pretty bad relationship with my mother. Let me say that my childhood was mixed. There was like a lot of amazing, great moments, and then a lot of fucked up moments. But other family members saw that I lived maybe better or equal to some, but better than some. I'm saying this politely, as politely as I possibly can. I didn't grow up in the hood. I didn't have to want or need for anything until I got kicked out the house. But anyway, so some family members just to this day don't feel the fact that I had a horrible household and relationship with my mother. Even my father is delusional, and he was there. So just it was nobody to really confide in. So at some point, my mom and I'll give you the longer version later, but I got kicked out the house at 16 and I was sent to foster care. There was a place I was at before the foster care. We'll talk about that later. But foster care, I was sent to a city called Chester, Pennsylvania. Chester, PA is about 30 minutes south of Philadelphia. And it is a very poor, destitute city. I'm gonna be honest with you. Okay, I'm gonna be mad honest with you. The city is really destitute. It is the complete opposite of how I was raised and how I grew up. The whole city is about 8 miles. It's an 8 mile radius city. It has one main high school. Yeah, it's pretty poor and fucked up. I did my time in Chester, and my heart is with Chester to the day I die. My loyalty is with Chester to the day I die. But I was in foster care, and I had 3 foster mothers at that time. During that time, when I came to Chester, I was talking like a valley girl. I don't even like how I'm talking now. I'm trying to have my professional voice on. But if you heard my other podcast, you know I can really talk sometimes. But I had perfect English. I talk like a valley girl. I would imitate it right now, but it sounds too simple. But you can't talk like that and you can't act like that in the hood. In Chester, especially where I was placed the first time around, was the hood. It was the hood. Okay. It was the part of the hood where you should be concerned. Right? I'll say it like that. And again, Chester has my heart, but I was a foster kid, and foster care was horrible. It was disgusting. It was a bitch. I had 3 foster moms, and the first one was horrible. I will tell all my foster stories in the future. I had 3 other foster sisters, and the only reason why I was there is because every time one ran away, the foster mom, her name was Renee. I don't know if she's alive or not. She ain't shit. But every time one ran away, they would replace him with another one. And at that time, I won the lottery again. I was that replacement. Um, she didn't do shit for me. She just wanted the money. She got a lot of money from me. And it was just really fucked up. I mean, one time she didn't want to feed us. She locked the food away. That was a whole other situation. But then my foster sisters started running away as well. As time went on, I started to adapt to my environment like humans do because you have to survive. And I quickly learned how to live in the hood. I did. Again, I have a lot of respect for that city to this day. I just do. I have a lot of family that came out of there. I have nieces and nephews to this day, even though I'm an only child. If you hear me say nieces and nephews, it came from that lifestyle. And that was normal for us. My nieces and nephews have kids now. That shows my age. But I remember I used to change their pampers. I remember when their moms were pregnant with them because I was around then. You understand? But there's a lot of beauty in poverty. It's a side that not too many people experience, but it's not something you want to wallow in, right? But my heart, every time I talk about Chester, it really takes me to another level. But anywho, foster care, my foster siblings eventually ran away. And then I was stuck with the bitch, and I was like, I ain't staying here. Fuck that. So I ran away too. And the woman was just miserable. Like she's just a miserable, evil woman who loved her dog more than she loved us. Her old ass dog, Precious. But so I ran away, and then I ran into another woman who. This is where all my nieces and nephews come from. This side of the family. So when you hear me say nieces and nephews, it comes from her. I will save that whole situation and viewpoint for another episode. But eventually I ran away from her household and I went to my third foster mom, who was amazing. Her name was Angie. And I met my little sister from there, my little sister Alicia. God damn it, Alicia. Oh my gosh. She was also from Philly. That's a whole different story. I love her to death, low key, but I don't deal with her. And one thing about foster kids, adopted kids, things like that is our emotional ties are different than others, in my opinion. We don't love the same. Some of us love too much. Some of us don't love at all. Some of us don't know how to love. Some of us are used to just being detached. And I am one of those people. I can't really say if it's from being in foster care or actually, no, I think it has a lot to do with being in foster care. And I don't know. I don't really psychoanalyze myself when it comes to adoption, but maybe the foster care part because so much happened there, and it just made me who I am today as an adult. There's a lot of contributing factors there. But Angie was an amazing foster mom. The problem was I was a fucked up foster kid. And I was so now that I've been out the house for a couple years, I got my freedom. I'm not physically and verbally and emotionally abused and things like that at home. Like I'm doing my own thing. I'm 16 and I want to run the streets now that I've discovered the streets and not just any streets, the hood of Chester. Like it was a fascinating and amazing world to me because this is the world that my parents always protected me from, that they raised me um, to be. They raised, actually, my parents never really talked about the hood except all they said was just bad. And my version of bad in the ghetto was like, a 4-story house with a skinny dog in the backyard and like think Pippi Longstocking in her household. It's like that's where my mind went. Right? So I'm in the hood, like, yo, what the fuck? Like, what? What's a crackhead? Oh, that's a crackhead. This young man that I've been talking to for 30 minutes. You know what I'm saying? So, I learned the hood the long way and the hard way, and we can talk about that but one time for the hood. But anyway, so Angie was amazing, but I wanted to run the streets and I just didn't know how to do it. I love my little sister to death. I mean, I never had a sibling before. So my little sister was amazing, but I didn't like her rules. Like her rules where you have to go to school, you got to come home, you got to do your homework. You can only be outside and you have a curfew. And then after that, you can sit on the step. No boys allowed. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm not doing this. I want to go back to the household where I wasn't loved. I'm saying where nobody was paying attention to me because they just wanted the money. So I went back to my second foster mom's house. Okay. And when you hear that whole story, it's very alarming and shocking that to some, like, because I ran away from her for a reason. And I've had conversation with her. I've seen her since, I've left, and she never discusses what really went down in her house. Nobody discusses what really went down in her house with me. And if they do talk about it, they're going to give you a fucked up version that's not true to make themselves feel better. And again, this happens a lot in foster care. Um, I think foster care, in my opinion, I can't tell what's worse, foster care or an orphanage, because I was only a newborn to 6 months in an orphanage. But foster care can be horrible. Depends on what type of foster parent you have. But I do feel that it's like rolling the dice, man. It's really. I've seen death happen. Children die. Children get neglected. Children get, abused, and I've seen children pimped out in foster care. Like it's it's just crazy. So I did eventually run away from foster care. I ran away from my second foster mom's house and became homeless, literally. And I became homeless. I will tell you that story. That's a touching and emotional story that I will share with y'all at some point. But when I ran away from home, from the last foster home, when I ran away from foster care for good, I was I had the assumption that I was going to magically find my biological birth mother, and she have tricked myself into believing that she was sitting on a whole bunch of money and she was filthy rich and she didn't really mean to put me up for adoption, and she's been waiting her whole life for me to find her. Yeah. That's and unfortunately that fantasy is what a lot of adoptees feel. We feel that way. I didn't know that was a thing until I joined a Facebook adoption Facebook group, and it's a lot, and it's heavy for those that realize it's not true. And obviously at some point I did find out that that wasn't the case, but I was always already an adult with kids by the time I met the incubator. Now the reality was I was going to search for her. So I'm like, I'll be homeless, but I'm going to do everything in my power to find my birth mother, because if she knew everything I went through in life, she would regret this, and maybe somebody kidnapped me. It was just and she didn't want this life for me, and I had to find her. So that's how I wound up meeting the woman who introduced me, who was the broker. I know broker isn't the right word. Social worker. I don't even think it's a social worker, but whatever you call the woman or the person that does the adoption between the two families. I want to be respectful of that. She was this brilliant woman. She deserves whatever title she has. But I did eventually meet her when I was in the shelter system, because when I ran away and was homeless, I went straight to the shelter system, and after sleeping outside the night before. But anyway, she was like, "Oh yeah, no, I can't just look up your biological mother and that's it. That doesn't work that way." And it just totally destroyed my world. And again, a lot of us adoptees, we go through that, unfortunately. Okay, the reality of searching, the search is real, the adoption search is real, and it's hard, and it's very draining, right? Especially when the laws are actually treating the adoptee as a problem. We are considered the eyesores in society. But I'm not going to harp on that too much because, like I said, that wasn't a thing for me. That wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing. But I made it a thing. And then I had to know these rules and these laws, and I had to start the search, and I had to start telling people, yes, I'm adopted, and this is the information I know. And it's really fucked up when you walk around this world and people are like, you look just like so and so. And then it's like, do I look like so and so? What does so and so look like? What's their name? Blah, blah, blah. Now, I will tell you, because Chester, PA is so small, a lot of people, if you know anything about Chester, you know the history about Chester, how people roll, it's been quarantined a lot. That's why when we had to go through quarantine because of COVID, that was another day for Chester, right? Chester has their history. I'm not going to go into that because I'm sure people from Chester are listening. You know what I mean? And like I said, I have a lot, my family's still there, my peoples are still there, my babies are still there. You dig me? Not my children, but my nieces and nephews, I always call them my first children. Now, real talk, a lot of people do look alike because the whole city has been quarantined over the years, and some people have never left the city. Yeah, and some people legit look like each other. I will let you in on a little something. My biological family is from a small town right outside of Philadelphia. So, and my biological grandfather and biological father lived in Chester. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Like, how would I know that? How would anyone know that? And we will talk about that in future episodes. But in the meantime, I burned a hole in your ear. I know I don't think I'm all over the place, but this is usually how I tell my adoption story. I try to paint you guys a picture, a clear picture. But that's how it started. That's how it ended. And ongoing. There's other stories that I will share with you. Hopefully this was enlightening. Hopefully it was interesting. And yeah, don't mistake my random chuckles and laughs as me taking the situation lightly or adoptions lightly. I definitely don't. Like, it's just either laugh or cry. I mean, in hindsight, I'm looking back at a situation, looking back into certain stories in my life and things that happened, and you can laugh at them, especially if we know now. Like, if we knew then what we know now, like, you would laugh too. But yeah, I'm going to continue to share, and I want to hear you guys' stories. If you guys want to be a guest on my podcast, check out the link below. I got y'all. All right, I got you. Sign up. Let me know. If you want to follow me on my other podcast, all my information is below. Coast to Coast Credit. That's my other podcast. If you need to check it out, it has nothing to do with adoptions. Nothing. Okay. But anyway, I will talk to you guys later. You have a good one. Bye bye.